Ruin at Rio Piedras by L. Ron Hubbard. A storm cloud of angry dust boiled up the road to the main ranch of the INT, and just before it could be seen two lathered horses, manes flying, heads pumping, and hooves thundering through the white dust. Dawson, the general manager, came erect in his wicker chair on the veranda and stared with wonder, his tobacco-stained mouth agape and his boots planted upon the planking. A puncher down by the corral yipped,
"It's old man Tanner!"
But Dawson didn't need that information. Only one madman drove like that on such a day. Only one man could afford to wear out horses in so spendthrift a fashion. The buggy careened into the yard, and old man Tanner jumped to his feet and leaped down, making the buggy sway as though it had been buffeted by a hurricane. A young lady, a lovely young lady, Nancy Tanner, who was most dear to the old man's heart, was glad of Dawson's aid in getting her to earth. She was dazed with so much dust and sunlight, but old man Tanner wasn't thinking about his daughter's death. He had driven like a thunderstorm, and he arrived like a blast of lightning. There was nothing small about Tanner. He was a colossus in everything, including the INT, which was so big that men said its removal out of Texas wouldn't leave much more to the state than a dotted borderline. Tanner himself stood 6'3" and weighed 240 pounds. He had the face of a St. Bernard and the eye of a Lobo. His voice, at a whisper, the punchers swore, could be heard for 30 miles on a wet day.
Place looks like a goddamn cemetery. So this is the way you run things when I'm not around?
I just came in.
Don't lie to me. You haven't been off this porch all day. Well, where are the 2,000 beeves I wired you to round up the day before yesterday?
And he angrily ranged his piercing eyes over the plains about the ranch.
There aren't any here at the main ranch. I had to send out to Rio Piedras, but they'll be here tomorrow.
Tomorrow? By God, they'd better be. Do you know that I have cars on the siding at noon? And I can't hold those cars more than 24 hours. Can I depend on anybody? Who is in charge at Rio Piedras?
Jim Lowry. You sent him out there yourself, remember? You exiled.
Jim Lowry? Tumbleweed Lowry? Why, you blithering fool, do you think for 10 seconds that young squirt could get 2 cows together, much less 2,000? And here I am depending on Lowry. Dawson, this ought to cost you your job. Do you know what I'm up against?
No, sir.
They're shutting me down. That's what. They won't extend my paper. They're trying to wreck me, and I got a market. I dug up a market at this time of year for 2,000 beeves, 2-year-old stuff, and nothing more or less will do. The railroad won't hold those cars without cash, and I can't get cash. Those cattle, at the very latest, should be started for Rio Piedras by tomorrow noon, to get to Bowie by dawn the day after. And that'll take some driving. And further, I'll bet you swell-headed young Lowry hasn't even begun to get them together.
Nancy protested.
He's not as bad as all that, Daddy.
Bah! He shoots up Bowie, he goes to jail, he gets drunk and tries to make love to my daughter.
He wasn't drunk.
Never mind, he had a nerve. A no-good puncher without money or prospects trying to marry himself a fortune. A gunslinging yap all bent for me for the howl hoot. He's no good, I tell you. Say, I sent him to Rio Piedras because that was the worst place I could put him. But who the hell made him foreman there?
Well, I didn't have anybody else. Connor quit, and Lowry was next in line out there.
Oh, God. Can't anybody ever do anything right? Dawson, saddle a Piedmont. I'm going out there and take charge of that myself. It's a matter of life and death. That depends the whole INT. If I could get those beeves closer.
You can't. All the 2-year-olds were shunted.
Don't tell me how to run my own ranch.
Stormed Tanner, starting to stamp up the steps. But at the first hard bang of his boot on wood, he let out a groan and grabbed for his foot and stood there swearing. Dawson and Nancy supported him.
It's his gout.
said Nancy to Dawson.
The doctor told him not to get angry.
Lowry, Tumbleweed Lowry, I hear that name in my sleep. Every time something happens, it's Tumbleweed Lowry. It's your fault.
He snapped at Nancy.
You wouldn't let me fire him when it caught him kissing you, by God.
Please.
I'll send a man out to Rio Piedras right away. And maybe by tomorrow morning, you can ride out there yourself. It's not an easy trip, Mr. Tanner. Conroy!
A moment later, a dark-clothed man with slick hair and 2 gleaming gold teeth came ingratiatingly around the end of the ranch house, where he had quite obviously been for some time. He held his Stetson in his hand and bowed.
I am sorry you're not feeling well,
said Blackie Conroy to Tanner.
You owe it to the ranch to take better care of yourself, sir. Ah, good afternoon, Ms. Tanner. I hope you are well.
Nancy looked away, but Tanner's face relaxed a trifle.
Oh, hello, Conroy. It's my gout.
If there's anything I can do.
There's something you can do. You can ride out to Rio Piedras and take over that young fool Lowry. Conroy, if we don't get those bees into Bowie before day after tomorrow, I'm a ruined man. I'm glad there's somebody I can trust around here.
And he glared at Dawson.
I was afraid something ill would come of appointing Lowry, sir. But I'll do what I can to remedy the situation.
Very businesslike, Conroy replaced his hat, adjusted the chin thong, and then strode with jingling spurs around the end of the ranch house where he had tied his horse, well knowing the sequence of events beforehand. He made a dashing picture as he hurled himself to saddle and went with slashing quirt down the road toward Rio Piedras.
There's somebody I can trust at least. Sometimes, Nancy, I don't think you've got good sense.
The girl looked after Conroy as though she had seen a rattlesnake. Shortly before dusk, Blackie Conroy spurred across the boundary of the Rio Piedras section. As the INT furnished him his horses, he was not sparing the quirt, even though the ground had become uneven. The country was desolate and tortuous, and so was not regarded with any favor by the INT riders. The grass was good, and there was water. But there were also badlands, too labyrinthine to be mapped, and into them cattle were wont to lose themselves with determination. And what was more important to a puncher, there was only one lone town near the ranch buildings, and that was an excuse for a pueblo mired down in the Mexican sands across the river and too lazy to move itself elsewhere. An assignment to duty in Rio Piedras was synonymous with banishment, and when the news of such an assignment reached ears, the question was always asked, what did he do? But for all that, it was good cattle country when men across the border were quiet. Blackie, scorching the trail, energized by the tidings he looked forward to giving out, still found time to note a strange fact. For the last 2 miles, he had seen only one animal, and he was an old longhorn outlaw scorned these many years as beef. And when Blackie got through the ragged pass and dropped down along the sluggish brown Rio Grande to head northwest toward the ranch buildings, he had still to see a good beef. Usually, this stretch was very populous with cattle, and Blackie had a bad moment thinking that Tumbleweed Lowry might have come through after all with that swift roundup. Darkness came, and he was still 6 miles short of the ranch headquarters. He laid on more heavily with the quirt, anxious to discover the truth. So intent was he upon speed that the first shot which came to him from afar was totally lost upon him. But a second and third made him hastily drag rein and send his mount pawing air. When the bronc had settled to earth, another shot sounded somewhere in the heels to Blackie's right. Neck reining, he spurred up a dry gully, alertly watching the blackness ahead. A ribbon of sparks ripped the ebony, and a belated report rolled around the hills. Blackie threw himself off his horse and advanced on foot with great care. Abruptly, straight ahead, a colt blazed. The hot snap of the bullet was close beside Blackie's head.
Hey, quit it! I'm Conroy.
Come on.
called a man up in the rocks, immediately firing in the other direction. Cautiously, Blackie crawled up beside him. It was Tumbleweed. In the calmest of moments, this young man had the air of violence about him, and just now his eyes were hot as coals. One got the impression that he was about to explode like a bomb, so difficult was it for him to contain his bursting vitality. His lean, roughly handsome face shone in the gloom, and he snapped down with his Colt as though he had to throw the slug with his own strength.
What you waiting for? Charlie Bates? Charlie Bates and two men were up there in those rocks. Smoke up.
Bates? Why, that's impossible. The Rangers got him last year.
If they did, his ghost is mighty handy with a branding iron. A sling iron from here while I'll inch around and get in back of them.
You mean you're gonna take all three of them? Where's your outfit?
You scared or something?
No, of course not.
Well, keep shooting. They think I'm alone. That gray rock up there, see it? They're behind that.
Thereupon, Tumbleweed slid out of hiding and sped down the slope into the gully to turn left and begin to work his way upward. Blackie fired now and then without any particular target. His head was too busy for him to give much thought to marksmanship.
Charlie Bates, is it? Oh, this is sweet. This is lovely. That rustler wouldn't leave a calf behind him. And everybody thinks he's dead, and all of Rio Piedras cattle are gone. Mr. Lowry, you may be handy with your tongue and hell with your guns, but this is one time when you picked the wrong man.
And through his mind passed the memory of a time, 3 months gone, when Tumbleweed Lowry had pitched him into a horse trough to the amusement of all Bowie. What business had it been of Tumbleweed's that Blackie Conroy had boasted a certain affair with one Nancy Tanner? Especially since it was pretty apparent from this exiling that Tumbleweed himself hadn't been slow to make up to her.
Charlie Bates. And with this clean sweep, he'll be heading for Mexico. And there won't be a thing to show that Tumbleweed Lowry hasn't been fattening his own.
A series of shattering reports sounded behind the gray pinnacle. The hill was alight with powder flame, and through that intermittent flashing sprinted a man. There was no doubt about his identity. The faint glimpse had told Blackie that this was Bates in all his silver conches. And though Bates had been a good target in that moment, Blackie Conroy had not fired. A moment later, a horse clattered away in the darkness. From the pinnacle came a halloo.
Conroy, why the hell didn't you stop him?
Blackie didn't answer. Taking it for granted that Tumbleweed had things in hand higher up, he toiled up the hill. In the darkness, two men were sprawled, sightless eyes staring up at the bright diamond stars. They did not particularly interest Conroy.
I had them. They thought I was still down there, and all you had to do was shoot, and we'd have gotten Bates. Damn it. I've trailed these gents for 6 hours trying to get up on them, and you have to spoil it all. I ought to make hash out of you.
Conroy stepped back a little. Men didn't stand up to this youngster if they could help it.
I didn't see him until it was too late.
Tumbleweed snorted in derision. He collected the guns of the dead men and then went through their pockets to try to uncover evidence, but their pockets were empty.
It's too dark now,
said Tumbleweed, staring forlornly into the blackness. He sighed deeply as though all the world was upon his back.
Come on, I'm hungry.
He strode down the gully to his horse, and Blackie, in sudden shock, looked around for his own.
I cut their broncs loose. Looks like we're riding double. Serves her right for not shooting that devil.
Blackie climbed up to the Bronx rump, and they headed out for the ranch.
What are you doing up here? This place is bad enough already. Cattle missing, nothing to drink but river water. Not even a can of peaches for 40 miles. A crew that growls all day about their hard luck, and now you.
Conroy was about to state his business, and then something prompted him to withhold it.
I'm taking over.
I don't know what the hell you'll take over. No cattle, no men, damn few supplies. There's a jug of molasses in camp. Maybe you can take that over.
No men?
Of course not.
Snapped Tumbleweed so violently that Conroy didn't want to speak again. The presence of Charlie Bates and Rio Piedras would, of course, quell stronger men than the INT men who had been sent here. They had not been particularly desirable, any of them, and it was more than likely that some of them had teamed up with Bates. At long last, they reached the dark ranch. The adobe buildings had a weary, crumbling air about them, and a shutter groaned and banged in the night wind. Tumbleweed stabled his buckskin and then led the way to the main building. Inside, he lighted a lamp which showed up the racked guns on the wall and the total absence of other adornment. The chairs were crates with the nails driven in, and the table was a dry goods box. Tumbleweed immediately fell to work cleaning his guns, and Conroy, by common consent, threw some pancakes together. Dinner was ready, and the guns were clean at the same time, and they sat down across from each other with the lamp between them. They were silent because they had never had anything in common, and Conroy was too occupied with his own problem and Tumbleweed too concentrated about the escape of Bates to think of anything else. When they had finished, Tumbleweed looked a long time at Conroy.
I suppose they want me back at the main ranch, but I'm not going. I got ideas about Bates. Must be plenty of stock hidden out somewhere in the Badlands. The Mexicans tell me most everything, and they ain't seen nothing cross the Rio Grande. God,
He exclaimed, suddenly bringing his fist down on the box.
to think I almost had him.
How long has this been going on?
Hell, about 3 weeks to my knowledge. Didn't Jimmy Fallon tell you anything when I sent him back? Yeah, he didn't show up here again, and I suppose that
Fallon hasn't been back.
probably Jai Gulch then. That's the trouble with this place. Always all hell breaking loose, and people get to thinking that the bad news ain't important. And there's so much of it. Boy, I'm telling you, the main ranch is going to be a relief after this.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Said Conroy, still busy with the problem of getting some vaqueros over the line and throwing at least an excuse for a herd together for the Bowie drive. Tumbleweed might be irresponsible, but he had so damned much energy that he couldn't be trusted. If the message about the 2,000 had ever reached him, or if he had forgotten about it, which seemed to be apparent in his bandit hunt, it was all the same to old man Tanner. Conroy had his doubts about Tanner's true sentiments toward Tumbleweed. The cattleman usually roared like a gored longhorn at a man when he liked him the most, but there wouldn't be any doubt about that now. Probably Tumbleweed would go galloping off to pick up Bates's trail in the morning, and that would leave an opportunity to grab some vaqueros from Santa Maria and sling a herd together the best he could. There would still be time, though he wouldn't be able to be choosy. There were always plenty of beeves up in the hills behind Rio Piedras, bandits or no bandits. And then up would come Tanner to find Conroy, the hero of the occasion. It was very pleasant, and Conroy smiled.
What are you grinning at?
Conroy started.
Nothing.
Never saw a man so pleased about nothing.
Said Tumbleweed, getting to his feet. He stretched and yawned, sinuous as a panther.
Guess I'll turn in. Gotta start riding early tomorrow.
Conroy smiled again, watching Tumbleweed head for the bunkhouse. He would still have to take precautions to put this over right. Tumbleweed wasn't a man to monkey with if he thought he was being framed. And Tumbleweed was the biggest stumbling block on the road to a certain destination Conroy had in mind. Nancy wouldn't care a lot for a man who had apparently brought her father so near the brink of ruin. Tumbleweed Lowry slid out of his blankets a full 2 hours before dawn. Dressed, he did not look very ornamental since he did not bother about shaving and dumped his face ears deep into the river in lieu of his usual morning bath. But then Tumbleweed was a man of contradictions. He could speak perfect English if he wished. He could be the worst rowdy in the world, or he could be a model for the Bowie parson, which he wasn't. And in his war bag were clothes of such flash and color that the Mexicans called him Pretty Shadow when he wasn't listening. He was not what one might call a reliable citizen, since he even forgot this morning that Blackie Conroy was in camp. So intent was he on picking up the trail where he had lost it that he bothered about nothing but coffee. And then, cramming his pockets full of biscuit and slinging his canteen over his shoulder, he went out to the corrals and got himself a fresh mount. Through the darkness, he made his way back to the place where he had cornered Charlie Bates. The sun came up to gild the Rio Grande and crimson paint the rocks. Great lumps of sage made purple splotches on the hills. He found the tracks, and not until then did he recall Conroy. But then it made no difference. Conroy was all soft soap and no guts. Hell of a man to take over Rio Piedras, where desertions were many, grouches were abundant, and deaths most frequent. But it served Conroy right. And to the pocket of his chinks went Tumbleweed's long hand to touch a white glove given to him those many months before. For a moment, Tumbleweed felt weary. It didn't seem as though he would ever do anything more than kick around through the hills and chase cattle. What chance did a man ever have to come up in this feudal world unless he was loose enough with a branding iron, which Tumbleweed was not? Once upon a time, he had rolled from the Mississippi to the Pacific in perfect content. A month in one place had been too long. What chemistry had happened in him which made him look with jaundiced eye upon such a purposeless life? He touched the glove again and then buttoned the pocket down. He examined the marks in the trail so that he could identify the horse through the errors in the shoes in case the trail got tangled. He had high hopes of coming on his quarry before many miles. He mounted, noting that the trail swung down along the river, and followed it with practiced eye at a trot. Only the one horse had been this way in 2 days, and so it was not hard to do. After 2 miles of swift going, the trail branched sharply left and started up into a slashed and gutted badland. Tumbleweed eyed the hills with care and loosened his gun in his holster. Other trails had taken him toward this spot, and he knew that Bates must have 6 or 7 men with him at his camp. This stretch was a catch-all. Murderers and thieves escaping both American and Mexican justice lodged here to prey upon the border. The ravines were deep and the valleys sudden. It was possible to use any of these canyon walls as forts. A regiment could not dislodge a dozen from such a place. Before this, when he had traced missing cattle, the trail had always led to this section. And now Bates himself had come this way. Yesterday, when he had picked up Bates in Santa Maria, a Mexican had mentioned a valley which had much water and grass. Maybe that was the place. Tumbleweed spurred forward on the alert, not knowing from what quarter a slug might come, and not caring too much since this was the first excitement he had had in many weeks. Deeper, he wove his way through the canyons, watching the kaleidoscope layers of rocks and gravel bend and twist on either side. Each sage might hide a gunner. Each cliff might boast a lookout. And they knew Tumbleweed all too well. Tumbleweed had a habit of being known. He was nearing the mentioned valley and still on Bates' trail. Ahead, he saw 2 great walls rising into the yellow sky, making an opening less than 20 feet across.
Nope,
said Tumbleweed, reining in behind a boulder.
not this morning, gents.
He backed out around a bend of the canyon and then turned to court his mount up a long slope which led to a ridge. Just before he reached the top, he stopped and dismounted, tethering his mount to a clump of sage. Afoot, he went to the rim and scouted the surface. All was quiet there, but he made no skyline target of himself. On hands and knees, he crawled along the course which he had paralleled below. At long last, he came to a position from which he could observe the valley. He gave a small sigh of relief and pleasure. The cup-like depression, carpeted with long grass, was colored reddish-brown by the cattle it contained.
So, this is the place. Damned if you haven't pretty near cleaned out Rio Piedras at that.
A small cluster of adobe huts, once occupied by Indians, had been appropriated by Bates and his men. Tumbleweed took a small glass from his shirt pocket and focused it.
Fallon and Dodd.
So that was the answer to a smooth-working rustling crew. Fallon and Dodd had known all the answers, and that was the reason no help had come. Tumbleweed cursed his lack of men. It seemed impossible to do anything against the 8 down there, but he had waited so long for this moment that now he could not restrain himself. He inched back out of sight, and then with rapid steps began a circuit of the valley just below the rim. The going was hard and the day was hot, but Tumbleweed, with something to do which interested him, was a stranger to terror or fatigue. It was only when he was bored that he had no drive. An hour and a half work brought him to a spot above the adobe huts built up the cliff. He lay there looking down. The men were taking it easy in the shade, but Tumbleweed wouldn't be stopped. He edged along the rim rock until he discovered one of the chimneys, left by softer stone weathering out of the harder mass. It was about 4 feet across, open on one side to the valley, and it went straight down for a long, long way. Tumbleweed took a deep breath and started. By bracing his back against one side and his boots against the other, he could hunch his way earthward, slowly but certainly. He was scraped on back and shins when he finally landed, but he did not greatly care. In fact, in his excitement, he felt no pain whatsoever. The back of Adobe Hut was about 30 feet away. The stones were thick on this slope which led down. On his stomach, using stones for cover, Tumbleweed crossed the open space. He came to the back of the hut and peered through the ragged curtain into a bare room. There was nothing here, and he moved on to the next. And there he found why he had not seen Bates. The man was lying at length on a pile of blankets, very peacefully snoring. Cat-footed, Tumbleweed went through the window with never a sound. He quietly drew his Colt and knelt beside Bates. The cold muzzle rested against the outlaw's side.
Wake up. Easy.
Bates lurched up to his elbows, one hand gripping the butt of a gun. He was wide awake on the instant and did not try to draw.
You?
Yeah, me. Want to take a ride?
Bates scratched his greasy beard and grinned.
Don't make me laugh, fella. I got 8 of them. If I let out one ship, they coming for you.
But not before you was awful dead.
Bates looked at the puncher's face and then decided not to yell.
Well, now that you got me, what the hell are you gonna do about it?
Tumbleweed took the outlaw's gun and stepped to the door. Hidden from the view of the lounging men were 4 horses, saddled up in case the cattle had to be handled in a hurry. He came back to Bates.
Get your duds off, brother. You probably got every known brand of varmints, but the INT ain't going to lose $50,000 in cattle if I can help it.
What are you gonna do?
Strip.
Said Tumbleweed, beginning to shuck out of his own clothes. He threw the shirt to Bates, who put it on, and then followed Chinks and Jeans. Presently, they were dressed in each other's clothes. Bates was really worried now.
You gonna get me killed?
You never can tell.
Said Tumbleweed, buttoning up Bates's red shirt over his own chest.
But I'm at least giving you a fair chance to go on living. Now walk out there slow and get on one of them hosses. I'm right behind you, and the first move you make, you're dead.
Bates hung back, but he took another look at Tumbleweed's face and at last moved through the door. He mounted, shaking a little with uncertainty.
Now you have a chance to get away from me if you can make it. Just keep riding like hell, straight ahead for the pass, and then down to the river. I got a better horse here, so don't get too fancy an idea. And mister, you better ride. Your boys are pretty good shots.
Bates didn't answer. He was white beneath the broad brim of Tumbleweed's hat. Tumbleweed's quirt cracked on the other mount's flank. Bates started out, knowing he couldn't help himself by digging spur and lashing his mount like fury. But for all that, when he rounded the end of the huts 100 yards and better from his lounging men, he forgot himself to shout.
It's Lowry! Get him!
Bullets cracked on the instant, and Bates remembered and dug spur again. Tumbleweed, with an encouraging wave to the men, went hell for leather after the apparent Tumbleweed. Bullets cracked for a moment and then stopped, since it was occurring to the outlaws that they might hit Bates. One behind the other, the 2 horsemen raced for the pass. A guard leaped up ahead of them and beheld the buckskin shirt and flat hat in advance and the red shirt speeding behind. The guard threw his Winchester to his shoulder and fired. Bates ducked, screaming curses at his men. He tried to draw in, but behind him, Tumbleweed fired. Bates spurred ahead through the pass, the puncher so close upon him that the guard confused them and stopped firing. The guard glanced up as Bates went by, but Bates did an astonishing thing. He reined in suddenly and grabbed the rifle away.
Tumbleweed Lowry!
Cried the guard in recognition.
Tell your pals to clear out fast. I'll have 30 men up here in a half an hour to wipe out if you ain't gone. And don't try talking no stock with you either.
But there wasn't any use in trying to tell the men anyway. They were mounted now and lunging over the valley floor like a tornado, anxious to be in on the chase. Tumbleweed hadn't looked for that. He dug spur and shot ahead in pursuit of Bates. Bates wasn't sure what was going to happen to him. Once he tried to deviate, but a shot swerved him back to the trail. And then he heard the men roaring on in pursuit far behind and took courage. He strove to slow down, but Tumbleweed's quirt cracked once and Bates was riding a runaway. Up the bank of the Rio Grande they raced, sending dust writhing up to meet the clouds. Bates now and again slowed his mount, and bit by bit the crew behind caught up to pistol range. At that pace they could hope to hit nothing, since they were still avoiding the shooting of Bates, but the lead cracking high overhead drove Tumbleweed on to greater speed. Now he didn't know where he was going. The ranch would be deserted. Conroy counted for nothing in a fight. Tumbleweed guessed he'd have to keep on as long as the horses would go and then make a one-man stand of it, which was not very encouraging. The 6 miles were swiftly sped at that pace, and then Bates hove into sight of Rio Piedras. Startled, he yanked rein, and his rearing mount almost took Tumbleweed into the dust. Tumbleweed slashed with his quirt, and Bates got started once more. And then Tumbleweed saw what had stopped the outlaw. They were riding straight into the arms of a crowd of men who stared open-mouthed for an instant.
Stop these rannies. They're rustlers.
The crowd behind him were also late in seeing, since Tumbleweed's dust had been a screen. And by the time they got half turned, guns were going furiously at the ranch. Tumbleweed dropped into the dust, and from his position he turned to help, but no help was needed. The outlaws would not risk riding back over that flat expanse to the tune of Winchester fire. 3 were already down. The others held up their hands, and punchers came forward to disarm them. And then Tumbleweed saw a most peculiar thing. Bates, dressed in the puncher's buckskin, was lying spread-eagled upon the earth. A cry of alarm and grief burst from behind the INT men, and forward sprinted Nancy to throw herself down beside the buckskin-clad figure.
Oh, Tumbleweed, he's dead!
Tumbleweed stood over her for a moment watching. Then he rolled Bates over, and Nancy saw the man's face. She stared up into Tumbleweed's laughing blue eyes, and with a surge of relief, she sprang into his arms. But she was not there long. Old man Tanner came thundering up.
Young man, I've got a thing or two to say to you. What the hell is the meaning of this? What's the idea of disobeying my orders and not even sending back word that you couldn't get that beef? My whole outfit is hinging upon 2,000 cattle, and where were you? Where were you? I'll tell you where you were. Out hunting bandits, that's where. Out hunting bandits where I'm going to rack and ruin for 2,000 beeves. Where are your men?
They...
Don't blame them for deserting you. I don't blame Fallon and Dodd over there for joining up with Bates.
Wait,
Wait be damned. That's all I do. Why can't you have some responsibility like Conroy? He's trying to get cattle together right now, but the range is cleaned. It's too late. Too late. We'd never make it in time now. They won't hold those cars.
Please, the range is clean because Bates cleaned it. There are about 3,000 head over in a valley.
A lot of good they'll do us now. We're just some way I could legally have your life. You're the worse than Bates. Conroy's worth 5.
Where is Conroy? Hey, you.
Conroy was very cocky now. He stepped forward beside the dead Bates.
Bates had my clothes on, and I bet I don't have to look very far to find the man that shot him thinking it was me.
You're crazy.
Too bad it wasn't you. I'm ruined. They'll take the INT and all for 2,000 beeves.
Oh, I remember. 2,000 2-year-olds to Bowie. Is that what?
He remembers. We're saved. He remembers.
And then he grabbed Tumbleweed's shirt and snatched him close, intending to knock him down. But Tumbleweed was quick, even in the grip of that colossus. He stepped on Tanner's foot, and the old man screamed and sank down on the earth, holding the gouty offender.
If you'll shut up a minute, I'll tell you something of interest.
To hell
I-
with that. Ain't it enough to ruin me without talking about it too?
But your beeves,
Shut up.
your beeves went to Bowie yesterday by the North Trail and are probably loaded by now.
What?
I said,
I heard you.
Cried the old man in joy, leaping up, his gout forgotten. He flung his arms about Tumbleweed.
You mean it? You're not lying?
where do you think the men are?
Retorted Tumbleweed.
Lots of crude dessert from here, but not mine.
Oh, my boy, you saved me from ruin.
And I saved you 3,000 head up in the valley, too. Don't forget that.
It's genius. What? That's what it is, genius.
And then he stumbled over Bates and remembered. His mood got black, and he advanced slow and ugly upon Blake Conroy.
A murderer, eh? So you tried to murder a genius, eh? By God.
But Conroy grabbed a horse, mounted, and fled with Tanner still roaring after him. Then the old man turned and smiled and started to embrace Tumbleweed again, but he couldn't. Tumbleweed was already being embraced.